All right, everyone. Super excited today to be talking to Ish. Ish is founder of Virtually. Ish, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, happy to be here. Hey, everybody. My name's Ish. I'm the founder and CEO of Virtually. My background, uh, my family moved to North America when I was just 5 years old. So I've gone through that kind of immigrant lifestyle. I remember when my parents actually, despite having amazing credentials, when they moved to the States, they actually couldn't find a job here, which is kind of mind-boggling. They both had master's degrees, and so we actually lived in the basement of somebody else's home in Toronto, and we had one car, and they would switch off, and they really grinded their way to where they are today. And today they're crushing it. But that immigrant experience was just such a big part of my upbringing and inspiration for what I'm doing now. So fast forward, obviously 20 years now. Let's see, I went to school at the University of Michigan. After Michigan, I was a software engineer at Facebook. I spent a couple years there until leaving to start my current company Virtually. Went through YC in the summer of 20 and raised the seed round from Tiger Global. Grew the team to we're 5 full-time, 5 part-time, so kind of a total team size of anywhere from 10 to 14. Really depends on the week. We bring on contractors all the time, and then we've been around almost 4 years now. It's been quite a journey.
Very cool. So you talked about YC and also, I guess, getting Tiger on your cap table. Pretty, major accomplishment. I think any founder or CEO would envy. What was that journey like? Getting into YC. Was that the first time? I guess you tried to get in. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Actually, I applied to YC 6 times before I
Oh,
got it. So it was definitely a roundabout journey, but I think with my journey to getting to YC really starts in college. I think we had originally started to hear about this thing called YC. All the big hot startups were going through YC, so it was definitely kind of this big stamp of approval. I remember when I was in Ann Arbor, there was one local company that had gotten funded by YC that would come by like our hacker house and like give us talks and give us advice. And I always dreamt like, wow, it would be amazing to go through YC. And we applied for the first time for our college startup. I think in my junior year, senior year, obviously got rejected. Wasn't we didn't really have that much traction. Then we tried again the following year. At this point, we had actually left college. We had raised a little bit of venture capital. We were out in LA working on this full time. I made a little bit of progress. We actually did get called in for an interview. I actually never was at that interview because at that time, me and my co-founder had a falling out. So I had already left the company. So it was a little bit heartbreaking that I had finally gotten this interview but wasn't able to attend. Third time was actually when I was still at Facebook at this point, and me and a buddy went to go work at hackathon, a YC hackathon, and first place was at this point applications had already closed, and so the first place was you'd get an interview into YC, which
mhm.
was very very coveted, and so I don't know how it happened. We ended up winning the hackathon and getting an interview, but I was still at Facebook. I was still like at a place where I couldn't leave, so couldn't actually attend that interview either. And then applied again. Now I've got the startup bug in me again, so I'm like itching to leave Facebook. Leave Facebook, March of 2019. Um, Start Virtually, immediately apply, get an interview, actually show up for the interview this time. This is like the third interview I've gotten. The first one I've showed up at.
Yeah.
This go fly down to Mountain View with my co-founder, got torn to pieces. Didn't get in. And then finally, we applied again a year later and got in for the summer 20 batch, which was the first remote batch. So, long journey. And so it just goes to show that I guess perseverance really is just huge factor in terms of that entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah, I love the hustle and the perseverance. Honestly, like 6 times. So, but you made it. So huge accomplishment. And then how did when you were raising seed, I guess Tiger Global invested. How did that come about? Was that through the YC, the demo days and whatnot? Like, how did that come about?
Yeah, I mean, it was very unexpected. I mean, at this point, point, you gotta remember that in summer 20, nobody had heard of Tiger Global. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, big hedge fund, but they weren't really doing early stage investments, let alone leading seed rounds, right?
Yeah.
Even today, they don't really do that. And so, how did that happen? Well, we launched our product on Product Hunt, I want to say in July 2020 through YC.
Yeah.
And I had somebody reach out to me who was really excited by the idea, really wanted to invest, and got on a call with him when we were fundraising, and um happened to have a really close relationship with Tiger, like was super excited about the business, wanted to invest personally, but also wanted Tiger to co-invest, made the intro to Tiger, had a had a great conversation, and before we know it, this individual and Tiger led the majority of our seed round, and that all closed within like less than 48 hours, and it was
Yeah.
right before YC demo day as well.
Okay.
And so I would say, while like it wasn't through the YC network, we got connected through YC. The existence of YC demo day, it was a forcing function for the round to close, because I don't think Tiger wanted to have to compete in like a bidding war with other investors, and so they moved quickly, and yeah, we got the round closed just in time.
The FOMO days of 2020, I guess. What a difference a couple of years make. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about virtually. What is your company offering?
I would just say, virtually, it's hard to describe, because we're actually not working on virtually anymore. So we're working on a new company called Peervine. But let me walk you through kind of the journey, how we got
Yeah,
there. So
absolutely.
virtually, yeah, at least the vision with virtually was very simple, which was, we saw this trend even before COVID, that like education was going virtual, and specifically we were excited about this prospect of being able to learn from anybody, not just the people who are in the same zip code as you. And so virtual education and live virtual education was something we were really excited by. And so we built essentially what we thought was the Shopify for online schools. We built that, we tried to sell it, make that business work for about 3.5 years.
Mm.
It was real grind, even with COVID, where you saw like this kind of migration to the online setting. It became really difficult. Growth was not great. I think for us, we very quickly realized that like we wanted to serve students, but at the end of the day, a lot of the educators, um, first of all, there weren't a lot of educators building these live programs, and of the ones that were there, their primary focus was on student acquisition and kind of top of funnel, and less so student success. And
Mm.
so we were building this software to drive student success, when really the willingness to pay just wasn't there. The market really didn't exist, and we couldn't acquire customers fast enough. And so when you bring all those three things together, I think it just became obvious, like, look, maybe somebody can build a really big business here one day, but not today. Like, I think even when you look at Shopify, like the volume of e-commerce that was happening when Shopify launched was still pretty, like, still magnitudes larger than kind of this live online education market is today. And so I think that might change. I think COVID definitely accelerated the trend towards people going through virtual education, people starting virtual academies. But I still think that the market's very, very small. You primarily only have coding boot camps do this. And then also, like, the huge portion, actually the majority of online learning is actually asynchronous.
Yeah.
Right. And so ultimately, we were going after this really, really small niche that really kind of stopped growing after kind of COVID kind of started to recover. And so ultimately, we made the really difficult decision to pivot. I basically gave the entire team a decision, which was, look, this isn't what you signed up for, so we're going to pivot. We're going to work on this new thing called Peervine. And if you want to stay, great, would love to have you. But if you want to leave, we'll give severance, we'll cover you, we'll make sure you find a good home. And as fortunate as it was, everybody decided to stay. And so the entire team has kind of shifted our focus to this new product, which is still the same mission. We still want to drive student success, but instead of going after educators, we're actually working with students directly. And so that's been a lot of fun. We launched our beta 2 months ago, and already, like, having really strong growth, really strong traction, and we're just having a lot of fun. And I think something I mentioned to you on our previous calls is just there's this level of founder market fit that's here with this iteration that just wasn't there with virtually.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that about educators, like, and just like institutions in general. So I taught as an adjunct right in the midst of pandemic. So three classes I think was in person, and then had to figure out a way to shift to virtual in the midst of the pandemic. So that was a fun experience. But 100% agree. I think also a lot of the institutions like they're way behind on like use of technology. I think initially we were using something that wasn't working out, then it kind of like we kind of defaulted to Zoom. A lot of the educators themselves, they're not the decision maker. Like what tools is this? You know, if you're in a large institution, it's the administrators, right? So even though there might be desire to use newer technology and stuff like that, you know, a lot of the time they're not the decision maker. So that's interesting. You said that, and then you know the buying pattern and all of that stuff. You know, 100% right. It's not so much on like delivering is education, more on like more emphasis on like acquiring students. So 100% right. So yeah, tell us about your you know the pivot. I think as a founder, that's definitely very tough decision, right? You've been working on this idea, this startup, you know, for a couple of years. How did you arrive at that point? I think you touched on some of that, but just, you know, talk us through that process. And I'm sure it was a bit of an emotional roller coaster uh, getting to that point. Like, how did you, like, what made you, I guess, decide that in the first place? And then what was your decision making process?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately it's every founder goes through this journey where you have this big vision of something you want to build. And inevitably, when it turns out that it's not working, and the first iteration rarely does, then you're at kind of this. You have to make this decision, which is to like what to do next. And there's like these micro pivots that happen, small changes with the business. And what I think happens often is that you go through enough of these small pivots up until a point where you don't even recognize the business anymore. You're not really building for a mission. You're building just for the sake of building a business. And that's kind of what happened to us. Like, I think over time we were just trying to survive, and we kept doing whatever it needed to happen for us to just get revenue and find customers. And I think by doing that and not really kind of questioning the underlying assumptions and deciding if this was really the business we wanted to build, we got to a place where the work we were doing was just not fun anymore, right? And I think that's like really important to be having fun when you're building a startup. It's hard work, but fundamentally it's got to be fun, because unless it is, you're not going to be able to stick with it for the long run. And we had finally got to a point where we were building a product that was essentially selling to higher ed. It was just like deep, heavy enterprise sales. And to make that business work, I would have had to basically spend every weekend at like a conference, networking with like university administrators. And that business just didn't get me excited. Like it's,
Yeah.
I just remember just thinking, waking up one day and just thinking like, what am I doing? Like this is not the people I want to serve. The people I want to serve are the students. And so when that became crystal clear that, one, the business, just the momentum wasn't there, and I wasn't excited about where we were headed, then it didn't make sense to go on. Like, I think before I was talking about perseverance, but I think perseverance can only take you so far. I think there needs to be more. There's like just like you have financial runway, there's also emotional runway. And so you need something else to fuel you. And usually for startup, it's you have this emotional endurance until you get traction and customers and revenue and growth, and then that stuff fuels you. And so just having nothing, we're just out of fuel. So it was, the question then was, do we just die? Do we give up? Do we sell the business? Yeah. Or do we try to pivot and do something else? And I think fundamentally, I just realized that like, if I were to, shut down my company, sell my business, what would I really want to be doing long term? And funny enough, I came to the realization that, wow, like I would probably go, I would work there for a couple of years, I'd save up some money, I'd go back and start another company. But then I realized, like, oh wait, like I'm doing that now. Like I have the venture capital in the bank, we have the runway to give it one more shot. And I kind of like my team. I don't want to have to go and rehire this amazing team. So why don't we just do it now? Why don't we just, instead of waiting 2 years, why don't we try again right now? And we leverage everything we learned, and all, we've learned how to execute as a team. We've learned so much about the industry. We have connections. We have our network. How can we leverage that to make this next thing a smashing success? And so that was kind of the birth of Peervine.
That's awesome. I guess, before we get to Peervine, there's probably a lot of founders out there, right, that are kind of contemplating similar decision. Last few years, pretty crazy with funding and everything. Then like at the end of the day, unless you find product market fit, startup is an experiment, right? It's like you have a hypothesis, you have a vision, and you can try to go chase it. And it doesn't always work out. So sometimes you have to make the hard decisions, similar to you, where you're figuring out, okay, what do I do next? Do I shut down the company, return money, do something else, or pivot? I guess, what advice would you have for startup founders out there that are maybe contemplating similar moves?
So similar moves in terms of whether or not to pivot.
Pivot, I guess, what's next, right? Like, how do you, obviously every situation is different in general, right? If they're contemplating it, like how they approach it, their investors or their team, like,
Yeah.
give us like a set of
Yeah.
the steps or things that you've done to kind of position you for this pivot.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things is, for us, it was just looking at the metrics. Like I think that just the simple act of just tracking your metrics and setting goals
Yeah.
is very powerful, and talking about it each week. Because when you set goals and you look at the data and it's not moving week after week after week, at that point it's really hard to lie to yourself whether the business is going or not. And that's the problem, is that like it's really easy to fool yourself and come up with the narrative about like why things aren't working, and then changing the metrics, right? I think this is a great talk by Michael Seibel about fake product market fit, and this is one of the things he talks about, which is people tend to change the metrics just to make them think they have product market fit when they really don't.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important that, and there's a quote from the mom test, which is like, your goal isn't to get a gold star, you want the truth, right? And ultimately, like you said, like any early stage startup, it really is research. It's R&D. You're running a science experiment. You don't get to will a product into existence. Yeah. The market needs to want it. There's just like there's law of physics, there's the law of the market. The market wants what it wants, right? As crazy as it might be. So just because you want it to exist doesn't mean the market does. And so it's our goal as startup founders to really be very methodical and treat this as a science experiment. Run experiments, have a hypothesis, and when you're wrong, move on to the next one. And being able to do that efficiently and being able to go through that cycle as quickly as possible is very important, because that's like more shots on goal. And so I think when you keep running the same experiment over and over again, that's the definition of insanity. You're not making progress. You're not changing your underlying assumption. You're not learning. And so I think when it comes to when to make this decision, I think it just comes down to the bigger decision that needs to be made is, for most people, is not whether or not you need to pivot. You always need to kind of progress in kind of your thinking and your vision. But the question is it a soft pivot or a hard pivot? And I think soft pivot is essentially the idea is like you're making tweaks, whether that's with the user base, who you're targeting, whether it's the product. Hard pivot is like you're completely kind of new product, new demographic, right? And you want to avoid hard pivots as much as possible. I think they're genuinely really bad because you're restarting from scratch. But it got to a point where we just felt like we didn't have confidence in the market anymore. We took a bet that boot camps were going to be huge, that they were going to dominate, that cohort-based courses were going to dominate. And once those markets stop growing, we stop growing.
Mm.
And so if we stayed, we would have died. And so then the only reasonable thing to do was like, okay, we have to go into a different market. We have to go into a different pond. So that was what we discovered. But I think every startup has to go through their own journey and figure out, like, is this the right market? Are we at the local max or are we at the global max? Right. And more often than not, people get stuck in the local maximum.
I love that. I think a couple of key things you mentioned, right? You metrics driven, right? You have some goals, and if you're consistently not meeting those goals, or you're finding that you're like you have to shift those goalposts, I guess, then there's a problem. Like recognize the problem, being true to yourself, I think is also key nuggets of wisdom there. Being market driven to see, if there is actually demand for your product, whatever you're building, is also key. Just don't build for the sake of building. And then, I guess you kind of alluded to that. Don't get maybe too wrapped in your idea. Wrap your, I guess, ego in the idea, whatever you're pursuing. I think recognizing the truth and making the decision based on that is a key thing. That'll serve you well as you kind of pivot to other ideas. So it was awesome. So you tell us about where you're at now. New idea, you pivoted. I think a couple of weeks ago, I was telling you, I was talking to you. Seems like a lot of early traction, a lot of excitement. And I think it's a super cool idea, by the way.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah, so Peervine, essentially what we realized was like, look, we're not gonna, if we want to drive student success, educators aren't the people to go after, especially in universities. It's so political, right? The people who are trying to advocate for the students are often professors, but the professors aren't the decision makers. They don't get to really choose their software. And it's so hard to integrate software with a behemoth that is a university. So we just realized if we want to serve students, we have to go directly to students. And we actually realized that the best people to equip, or I guess to help students, aren't actually the educators. It's other students, it's peers, people who are just a little bit ahead of you. And when I think back to my success that I've had, whether it's been, landing my job at Facebook, whether it's becoming a TA, getting to YC, the peer network is everything.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we noticed in our research into kind of college campuses that peer network just isn't there. College campuses are incredibly fragmented now. When I was in school, Facebook dominated everything. It was like the virtual town square, but students aren't on Facebook. And so the way they connect is through these large 200-person group chats, which are just not useful. It's not conducive to connecting with one another. And so essentially you can think of what Peervine is it's like a Reddit for college campuses with few very subtle but important differences, which is, unlike Reddit, which is anonymous, we use real names, real faces. We require EDU verification, so you have to prove that you're a student at that school. And it's completely gamified. It's gamified because we wanted to create incentives for peers to help other peers. So much of the wisdom that makes you successful in life it's trapped in your head, and it's never really passed on after you graduate, leaving the younger generation just to reinvent the wheel. And so we had this idea, is like, look, what if we could start incentivizing these upperclassmen to helping these underclassmen? Everything that they've learned, all that knowledge, let's find an engine to extract that information and serve the younger class. And if we can do that, then students will be better off, and that'll help them succeed academically in their career and just navigating campus life. These are young adults who they're learning to become grown-ups for the first time, and there's just like all these life logistics stuff which they're doing for the first time. They don't have people to go to. Their peer network sometimes isn't enough. So we want to give you access to peers that you might not have access to otherwise. And that's Peervine. We just launched in beta at the University of Michigan just under 2 months ago, and already seeing some great traction.
It's awesome. Yeah, it reminds me, I'm old enough to remember when Facebook launched, right? You needed that .edu to actually sign up in different campuses and stuff. So definitely a great model to kind of expand to different colleges and stuff. But I also like the fact that it's focused on specific user community. I think over time, Facebook just try to go after too many things. I'm not on Facebook, by the way. I don't even know what it looks like these days. So definitely, I think the timing is right. There's been other kind of social network in the past few years that gained a lot of traction, like Nextdoor, focused on hyper local communities and things like that. So yeah, I definitely see a lot of potentials there. All right, this has been awesome. So I always ask any founders, entrepreneurs I talk to, if you had some advice for aspiring entrepreneurs or just anyone really, what are, I guess, a couple of advices you'd have for them to take away based on your experience, life experience, experience as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, I'll double click on some of the stuff I've already said. The most important is to really do things you love with people you love. I think that's really important because to get good at anything, to be the best at what you do, you need to be doing it for a very long time, potentially decades. And the only way you're going to be able to do that is if there's that internal fuel. And that only comes when you're doing things that bring you joy with people that bring you joy. So I think that is probably the number one advice I give to people. The other one is just having the courage to do hard things. I think all success in some form in life and business comes from doing hard things. It's very interesting where a lot of the things that are easy in the short term are almost always makes your life harder in the long run, and the stuff that's hard in the short term makes your life easier. So a couple examples, like it's so easy for me to not go to the gym today, to eat like the junk food and order fast food. That's very easy. In the long run, that makes my life very hard because now I'm struggling with obesity, diabetes, other diseases. Life is difficult. It's hard to date. It's hard to meet new people, build relationships. I'm not able to manage my mood well. Easy in the short term, hard in the long term. And then you flip it, it's hard to eat healthy. It's hard to go to the gym, have an honest and direct conversation with somebody who you've had a conflict with. But doing that hard stuff is really uncomfortable now, but it makes your life so much easier because now you're setting yourself up for this compounding growth, this compounding success. These are the people who get wealthy in life. These are the people who enjoy long, healthy lives and healthy relationships. And so it's just one of those things where I've really tried to internalize, which is if I'm avoiding something, I try to really think like, is this something that's hard in the moment, but it will make my life easier down the road? And if it is, I try to act.
That's great. Couple of, I guess, nuggets of wisdom I took away from there. Focus on things that are long-term in nature. Focus on things that will give you compounded growth over time. So thank you for that. So I think we started talking about this as you joined. Tell us about the tie. So that's really interesting. A lot of founders I talk to, they don't typically, wear a tie. So tell us a backstory about that.
Yeah, it was actually over a year ago. I came to the team and I said, look, I'm really serious about us getting to product market fit. I want us to get to product market fit. And so until we have undoubtedly achieved product market fit, I wear a shirt and tie to work every day. And I have now for over a year. So it's a reminder to myself about the commitment that I've signed up for. And it's so the team can also see that I'm serious about that commitment as well.
That's cool. That's awesome. I think I pretty much gone through all the questions and topic I wanted to cover. Anything else you want to share with us in closing?
No, if anybody wants to keep up with me, I'm just at Baid on Twitter, ISHBAID. Add me on LinkedIn, message me. Yeah, would love to chat.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much, Ish. Hopefully see you soon in person.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks so much, Rashad.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.